In March of 2013, BioShock Infinite released to near universal acclaim. Everything from its complex and thought-provoking story, to its breathtaking setting, to its engaging gameplay loop, to its intriguing cast of characters, most notably the heart and soul of the game, Elizabeth, was praised as some of the best work that had ever come out of the gaming industry. It did so many things incredibly well, and for many people, after finishing it, they walked away with the sense that they had just played a masterpiece. And I was one of those people. I had never been so moved by a game before. I didn't think it was perfect, because nothing is, but it felt like a once-in-a-generation title that pushed the boundaries of what games could be, and told a story that seemed like something greater. Once I beat it, I immediately beat it again, and then a third time. Within 2 weeks, I had all of the achievements, and I found myself thinking about it non-stop. I wrote notes trying to detail the various timelines of the story, and came up with theories about every possible explanation there could be for the ending. To be honest, it is one of maybe 3 titles that got me to want to start making videos in the first place. I adored it. And since playing it a decade ago, I've always considered it to be one of the best games ever made. Then last month, I played it again, and I hated it. I wouldn't say it is a terrible game by any means, but throughout this replay, I found myself constantly thinking, why did I ever like this so much? And look, I'm sure we've all gone back to a game we once loved, only to find that it has aged poorly in one way or another. I still get sad every time I try to play GoldenEye for the N64, only to find that it is near unplayable. But revisiting Infinite felt different than that. In fact, while the game certainly is a product of its time, its mechanics, graphics, and approach to storytelling aren't all that dated. It still looks good and plays mostly fine. So this isn't just a case of an older game being kind of old. It's a bit more than that. To be honest, the parts of Infinite that bother me most now are things people have been critical of since its release. Its story is a mess largely due to it using quantum mechanics and the many worlds theory in a way that really isn't very logical. Most of its major themes fall flat, as even though the game tackles many complex ideas, it fumbles at every chance it gets to actually say something meaningful, and the characters don't have all that much depth to them, making nearly every moment that should feel impactful not hit nearly as hard as they're meant to. When I first played Infinite, I never would have imagined I'd say any of these things about it, as it had such a profound effect on me. I had this sense that the game was important. I don't know that I could have articulated why, but I just knew it. And looking back now, I think a lot of that was rooted in an aspect that Infinite actually does excel at: spectacle. The presentation of Infinite is impressive even by today's standards. Every environment is visually striking, and Columbia as a whole is one of the coolest looking video game cities out there. The art style is colorful and in some ways timeless, as they went for a more Disney type look than a hyper-realistic one. Along with that, the performances are stellar, especially those of the Lutece twins and of course Elizabeth. Robert and Rosalind's dialogue is flawlessly delivered by Oliver Vaquer and Jennifer Hale. Nearly every one of their lines is filled with sharp, witty wordplay that contains loads of layers, some of which can't be understood fully until subsequent playthroughs. And Courtney Draper's portrayal of Elizabeth exudes so much innocence and wonder and longing that it is almost too easy to align with her goals instead of Booker's. And the story itself has a grand concept, one based around how choices can shape reality, and it uses the frame of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics to show the consequences of characters' choices. There are many twists throughout that literally shift the game's reality, and when first playing it, every time I thought I understood what was going on, it hit me with something new and exciting that always kept me on my toes. It bombards players with all of these aspects, barely giving them any time to reflect, and because of that, it is so easy to get swept away, to be enthralled by what you're seeing and hearing and experiencing, to have this sense that the game is important because it is telling you that it is through its spectacle. But when you look past the glamour, when you try to dig into what it's all about, things get a bit muddy. Not everything adds up by the end, and a lot of choices the characters make feel contrived or out of left field. With pretty much any story, you need to suspend your disbelief to a degree, but BioShock Infinite pushes that suspension past a reasonable level. Back in 2013, I had no problem with that, and to be honest, I didn't really question anything until I'd reached the credits, because the game moved at such a rapid pace that all I could think about was what might come next. But this time, I found myself questioning everything. Like, why did Booker and Elizabeth go into a new reality reality in order to find the weapons they were tasked by Daisy Fitzroy to get, without considering that the Daisy Fitzroy in that reality might not have made the same deal with Booker or even know he exists. And for that matter, why did the game paint Daisy as being just as bad as Comstock for leading a justified rebellion against him and Fink? And why did she have a last-second heel turn where she started threatening the life of a kid? And I know the DLC answers it, but honestly, it only makes it worse. And why do only some people lose their mind from being dead in one reality but alive in another? If there are theoretically infinite realities, everyone would be dead in at least one, so shouldn't every single person be having the same conflict? Or is this a result of how going through tears works? Is it less about traveling from one reality to the next and more about collapsing two onto each other, essentially merging them? But if that's the case, why aren't things merged together except in this one small specific way? Shouldn't there be doubles of everything or merged versions of people either physically or mentally? And what actually was the deal with Lady Comstock's ghost? Because she doesn't really follow any of the rules the game establishes, and it feels like they needed a unique seeming boss more than anything else, regardless of how it breaks the science of the game. And don't even get me started on the ending, which asks players to buy into a wildly arbitrary explanation for how the many worlds theory works. None of it makes... This isn't what I'm here to do. I don't want to pick at every aspect of BioShock Infinite I now find to be questionable and set forward arguments about why I don't think they work. Honestly, I don't think it matters much whether Infinite is good or not, and even if I did, I don't think there is anything I can say that will settle the matter. Convincing you that BioShock Infinite is bad actually is not something I'm interested in doing. In fact, if you like Infinite, if it still means something to you and you feel moved by the events of the game, I truly hope you continue to, because I wish I did. I don't like feeling as if I've lost one of my favorite games. And the worst part is that this isn't an isolated incident. For me, replaying old favorites now comes at the risk of them no longer being old favorites. A similar thing has happened to me with two other games in the past couple of years, one of which you're all going to be really mad at me about. Those being Assassin's Creed 2 and The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Both have long been on my short list of favorite games of all time, but during my latest replay of each, I found very little enjoyment in them. I don't have any disdain for them in the way I sort of do now for BioShock Infinite, but my love of both has been tarnished. And of course, the question I can't help but ask myself is, what's wrong with me? Why is there such a disconnect between how I felt about these games before replaying them and how I feel now after? And while the answer for each game is a bit different, it mostly comes down to a combination of three things. How I've changed, how the gaming landscape has changed, and how one of the most unreliable things in the known world is human memory. While all of these elements apply to my changed feelings towards these three games, one aspect typically takes the driver's seat more than the others. For instance, my feelings towards BioShock Infinite are influenced most by the ways I've changed. Like, when I first played it, I didn't do this as a job. I barely even looked at games critically. I just played them because they were fun. To be clear, this isn't me trying to say that I was wrong to like it then and only did because I wasn't as smart as I am now. It's more that since starting to regularly analyze and critique games, I look at them through a different lens than I used to. One that often leads to me being more critical about stuff I play, because I want to examine things from many different perspectives and acknowledge both successes and flaws to determine what works well and what could work better. I do my best to not let it control me too much, but as I spend more time thinking about the negatives than I used to, it makes it easier to walk away from a game feeling negative about it. In turn, viewing things through a more analytical lens has led to it being harder for me to get swept up in something like the hype or spectacle of BioShock Infinite, because I am actively trying to look past those things. Where the grandiose nature of Infinite once helped to distract me from the parts of the game that might raise eyebrows, this time through, its use of spectacle only highlighted them. Along with that, I am also a decade older now, and throughout those 10 years, I have become more cynical. I'd like to think I'm not a curmudgeon, but I did just say curmudgeon, which I think kind of makes me a curmudgeon, but I don't have the same bright-eyed enthusiasm I once did. I'm more picky now about how I spend my time because I don't have as much of it as I used to. Along with this, I hadn't played nearly as many titles at that point in my life, and Infinite did a fair amount of stuff, especially in regards to Elizabeth's AI and animations, that were cutting edge at the time and unlike anything I had seen before. But while I can still recognize that this was groundbreaking for 2013, when replaying it, it didn't wow me in the same way it once did. Back then, Elizabeth being so impressive made it easier for me to look past the parts parts of the game that weren't, as it is harder to see the flaws of something when you are so focused on the positive. However, as I wasn't as impressed by her on this playthrough, I didn't spend nearly as much time focusing on the good. And the main reason Elizabeth didn't have the same impact on me was because I've seen companion characters be done better since. In fact, I think it was done better later in the same year Infinite came out with Ellie in The Last of Us. And a part of me wonders now whether or not Infinite would have been looked at differently had it come out after The Last of Us instead of before. Players and reviewers would have been measuring Elizabeth's effectiveness as a character up against Ellie's instead of the other way around. And I think that's a comparison that doesn't do Elizabeth any favors. This is obviously all speculation and means very little, but I think it would have reviewed a bit worse had that been the case. The scores wouldn't have been dramatically lower, but I do think they would have been lower. And this starts to touch more and more on how games have changed, because the gaming landscape is continually iterating upon itself, which on one hand has led to incredible titles that elevate what came before, and on the other has caused some developers to retread the same ground a bit too often, causing many titles to feel stale and played out. By and large, that's where a lot of my feelings towards Assassin's Creed 2 stemmed from while replaying it. I have long held it up as one of the best open world games out there and the peak of the Assassin's Creed series. When it first came out, running around the streets of Florence and Venice was one of the coolest things I had ever done in a game, and it literally got me to look at the world differently. I couldn't even glance at real world buildings without searching for the best way to climb them. At the time, it was one of the most freeing and unique video game experiences I had ever had. But since then, its core formula has been copied countless times. Most modern open world games take at least some cues from the first two Assassin's Creed titles, and many still emulate the structure that AC2 popularized back in 2009. It isn't hard to trace a line from Assassin's Creed 2 all the way to Horizon Forbidden West. And look, it is a style of open world game that has been proven to sell, which is obviously why so many studios have developed titles inspired by it. But it is a formula that has gotten stale for many people, myself very much included. Going back to play Assassin's Creed 2 in a world where so many titles are just Assassin's Creed 2 but a slightly different flavor has made playing it just as boring to me as playing any of those other games. For so long though, I imagined it as if it were somehow different, as if it were somehow better than those games. With the Assassin's Creed series specifically, as each new title came out and appealed to me less and less, I kept thinking back to my time with AC2 and wishing the series would have a return to form. But it already was in form. For better or worse, the gaming industry has been shaped by AC2. And maybe this isn't fair, but as someone who doesn't love the direction open world games have taken, during my replay, I found myself resenting it. Assassin's Creed 2 is the face that launched 1,000 ships. For so long, I thought of it as an exception to the Ubisoft rule, but in reality, it is the rule. It does all the things people make fun of Ubisoft games for doing, and it does a lot of them far more often than titles that get infinitely more crap for doing them ever did. While a large part of this is a result of how the gaming landscape has changed, obviously the unreliability of memory, in this case my memory, did some of the heavy lifting as well. I remembered how the game made me feel, but not the specifics of actually playing it, and over time I subconsciously filled in new details about it. It stopped being the version of the game it actually was and started being the one I wanted it to be. And this process of misremembering a game can be seen even more blatantly by looking at my experience with Majora's Mask. For the majority of my adult life, Majora's Mask was high up on my list of all-time favorite games. I loved its atmosphere, tone, and general weirdness. I found its use of masks that expand Link's abilities to be nothing short of brilliant. I felt its slate of dungeons were the most creative and consistent in the series, and above all else, I adored the dark and deep story it told that explored heavy themes and presented characters who weren't the typical heroes we're used to seeing in Zelda games. When I replayed it though, almost none of these things felt as grand as I expected them to. It's not that these elements weren't there at all, but they didn't live up to how I remembered them. The characters didn't feel all that fleshed out, the mask mechanics seemed like they weren't utilized to their full potential, the dungeons ranged wildly in quality, and the story didn't grip me in any meaningful way. At first, I thought the problem might just be that the N64 had aged to a point where it was hard to go back and play games from it, but within the same year, I replayed Ocarina of Time and had an absolute blast. So it wasn't that. What I recognize now is that when I started to consider Majora's Mask to be one of my favorite games, it had been years since I had actually last played it. And I'm sure some people will chalk this up to pure nostalgia, which I imagine played a bit of a role, but growing up, I didn't care about Majora's Mask all that much. I remember thinking it was good, but I also found it confusing and challenging because I didn't fully grasp how the time loop worked. And as a 10-year-old, that sort of thing frustrated me more than anything else. So it wasn't playing Majora's Mask as a kid that made me fall in love with it. It was thinking about it as an adult. I didn't realize this until recently, but my actual favorite thing about Majora's Mask was the conversation surrounding it. I loved talking about it, I loved watching videos about it, I loved sifting through the bend-round lore, I just loved engaging with anything Majora's Mask related because I found something so undeniably intriguing and appealing about its aesthetic and position in the Zelda canon. And from all of that, I created a version of the game in my head that was bigger and better than a title developed in a year over 2 decades ago ever could have been. After building it up for so long, playing it again made it painfully clear how different the actual game was from my idealized version of it. And to be clear, yes, I know I'm the problem, but I can't really control how my memory works. Time will always smooth away the finer details, making it easier to remember things as more than they were, especially when so much time is spent thinking about them with such reverence. BioShock Infinite opens with a quote from one of the Lutece twins saying, "The mind of the subject will desperately struggle to create memories where none exist." It is in reference to how the game handles certain aspects of the many worlds theory, but it also perfectly describes my relationship with Infinite, Assassin's Creed 2, and Majora's Mask. In the absence of playing these games, I unknowingly filled in details of my own about their stories and their gameplay. The longer I went without playing them, the better they were able to become. And that is why going back to them has been so hard. Not only am I a different person now who doesn't value all of the same things I once did and has had so many more experiences both with games and life in general, but also I've been remembering these titles as perfect versions of what they were. So it's no surprise that this potent combination led to me feeling disappointed when revisiting these games. And I imagine part of why I feel as negatively as I do about them is not because of their actual quality, but because of how let down I felt that they didn't live up to the impossible expectations I had set for them. To be honest, I'm afraid that this will keep happening with games I love, that I will lose more and more titles that once meant the world to me if I replay them. Thankfully, I do think some of them will be protected from this fate. I've talked before about how many of my favorite games are ones that can't really be replayed. Stuff like Outer Wilds and Shadow of the Colossus, and in my opinion at least, Breath of the Wild. Ones that center their core gameplay loops around discovery, making it so once those discoveries are made, they can't really be made again. Titles like these are focused on a unique first playthrough and don't really care all that much about having any sort of replayability. There's certainly an argument that most games are best enjoyed on a first playthrough, and that's largely fair, but some clearly are more intentionally designed around that idea. Outer Wilds is the most pure example of this, as once you know the solution to the biggest mysteries in the solar system, you have everything you need to beat the game. And unless you find some technology to wipe your real-life memories or get a really bad concussion, which I don't recommend, you can never play it again in the way it was intended to be played. While Shadow of the Colossus and Breath of the Wild are less extreme examples of this, they do share a lot of the same qualities that make for an amazing first playthrough, but offer a far less interesting experience every time you go back. And because I see these games as ones I can't truly replay, that means anytime I do go back to them, I won't judge them for not living up to my memories due to how they're designed. I do think this is something I will need to keep an eye on though, because my memory has already proven it is not infallible, and I don't want my positive opinions on these games to grow out of control any more than they already have. But a part of me is glad to know that I won't have the same experience with them that I did with Infinite, AC2, and Majora's Mask, simply because they share different design philosophies. After all this reflection, I find myself wondering, am I better off for knowing that I no longer like these games? To be honest, finding Infinite's story to be off-putting and nonsensical doesn't provide all that much value in my life aside from being able to make a video about it. It's obviously important to challenge the way you think about things so that you can be sure you are acting in accordance with how you truly think and feel and not just following a train of thought based on some old, deeply rooted bias. But is liking a game, even though you probably wouldn't still like it if you actually replayed it, harmful? Does having this kind of knowledge make you happier? Is it important to spend time replaying everything from your past just to check if it holds up? And I think the answer to these questions is no. That doesn't mean you shouldn't replay old games you love, but you also don't owe it to anyone to replay something just so you can have a more up-to-date understanding of it. My thoughts on things now are not intrinsically more valuable than they were back then just because I'm older and more experienced with games. They're just my opinions, and I'm sure in another decade they will be different again and not necessarily better. I hope me replaying stuff and finding that I don't like it anymore doesn't keep happening, and I also hope I can work on ways to not let my memories drift so far from reality. But But this may just be part of being a human. Another part of being a human, though, is holding on to stuff you care about. So love the games you love regardless of when you last played them. Don't be ashamed of looking at old titles with rose-colored glasses. And if it's still one of your favorite games, maybe don't replay BioShock Infinite. Regardless, though, of if you love it or hate it, if Infinite lives rent-free in your mind like it does for me, and you'd like to hear some more thoughts on it, I actually made a whole nother video that's just as long as this one, solely focused on its ending. I dive into some of the various theories fans have put forward about it over the years, and tried to come to terms with what the ending was attempting to accomplish. And you can watch that video right now over on Nebula. Nebula is a creator-owned streaming service that is home to all of my videos. You can watch ad-free versions of everything I post on YouTube, as well as a catalog of videos that are exclusive to Nebula. On top of it having more stuff for you to watch, it is also one of the best ways to support me as a creator, because when you sign up for Nebula using my link in the description, I get a chunk of that money for as long as you're subscribed. Nebula not only helps this channel keep running, but it also allows me to branch out with different types of content and test ideas I've always been interested in pursuing. When you sign up using my link, it comes out to just $2.50 a month, and you not only get access to the exclusive stuff I make, but also to all the videos made by every other creator on the website, which includes many of the best channels on YouTube, ranging from Tierzoo to Jacob Geller. It is an absolutely stacked service that will give you loads of extra stuff to watch while also directly supporting me. So sign up and watch me unravel a bit as I talk about time travel and quantum mechanics. Anyway, thanks to Nebula for sponsoring this video. For all of you still watching, hey. I'd like to thank my patrons for making this channel possible and give a special shout out to Adamo and WilliamGlenn8 for being honorary bagbutens. I hope you all have a great day and or night, and I'll see you in the next one.